many of us, I'm sure, have struggled with and thought about over the last number of years in general is what type of day is Rosh Hashanah supposed to be? It seems like a very, very confusing day. On the one hand, if you look in many of the sources, it seems to be a day of seriousness, a day of judgment, right? It's Yom Hadin. It's the day that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is judging us. And yet, on the other hand, there are a number of sources that seem to indicate that it is a Chag, it is a Yom Tov. So let's just dive into some of the sources to really highlight this question. If you were actually going to begin with source number 6. Source number 6 is a relatively well-known Gemara that you may have heard before. And that is, the Gemara is dealing with the question of why we don't say Hallel on Rosh Hashanah. Right? If Rosh Hashanah is a Chag, and generally on the Chagim we say Hallel, to even strengthen the question, every Rosh Chodesh we say Hallel. And Rosh Hashanah is not just Rosh Chodesh, it's Rosh Hashanah. So why do we not say Hallel on Rosh Hashanah? So asks the Gemara in source number 6, Michlal, Diber Rosh Hashanah leka Hallel. Says the Gemara, you're implying, based on the previous conversation, that we don't say Hallel on Rosh Hashanah. My time, why not? We should definitely be saying Hallel on Rosh Hashanah. Amar Rabbi Avo. Rabbi Avo gives the following answer. Amru malachei ashareis lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The malachei ashareis, the angels in heaven, turn to Hashem and they say the following: Ribono shel olam, Creator of the world, mipnei ma ein Yisrael omrim shira lefanecha b'Rosh Hashanah u'v'Yom Kippurim. Why are Am Yisrael not saying Hallel to you on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur? These are days of holiday. They're days of Chag. Amar lahem, God responds with, again, a refrain that I'm assuming many of us have heard. Efshar melech yoshev al kisei din, v'sifrei chayim v'sifrei metim ptuchim lefanav, v'Yisrael omrim shira. How could it be that I'm sitting on my throne, the king is sitting on his throne, he's got the book of life and the book of death in front of him, and they're going to sing Shira? Right? Rosh Hashanah isn't a day for song. Rosh Hashanah isn't a day for celebration. Rosh Hashanah is a day of judgment. And therefore, says HaKadosh Baruch Hu, again, whether this conversation actually took place or this is meant to just highlight and teach us a message here about Rosh Hashanah, the message is clear. Rosh Hashanah is a serious day, and that's why we don't say Hallel on Rosh Hashanah. So it's clear that on the one hand, Rosh Hashanah is meant to be a very serious day. And yet, if you continue on source number 7, again, this might be a source that some of you are familiar with. We have a Yerushalmi that discusses or questions, not questions, I would say, discusses and tries to highlight the way that we act or the way that we approach Rosh Hashanah. Source number 7 is Yerushalmi in Rosh Hashanah. Rav Chama be Rav Chanina v'Rav Hoshaya. There were two people, Rav Chama be Chanina and Rav Hoshaya. Chad Amar, one of them said, Ezu Uma Ku'umazot. What kind of nation is like our nation? Benoheg shebe'olam. Generally, in the standard way of the world, Adam yodea sheyesh lo din. If a person knows that he's going to have judgment, if a person's about to go to court, lovesh chorim, he'll wear something very serious. Again, it says black here. It doesn't mean black. It means he'll wear serious clothing. He's not going to wear celebratory. He's not going to walk in a nice, his brand new shiny suit, let's say. He might wear a very serious clothing. Misatef shchorim, he'll wrap himself in something serious. Migadel zikano, he might even grow his beard as a sign of the seriousness of this. She'ene yodea hech dino yotzei, he doesn't know how things are going to turn out. And yet, how do we act on Rosh Hashanah, this day of din? Aval Yisrael eino ken. That's not how Am Yisrael act. Lovshim livanim. They wear white clothing, whether it's white or it just means our nicest clothing. We wear celebratory clothing. Misatfim livanim, we wrap ourselves in white. Some have the minhag to wear a kittel. Migalchim zikenav, they shave their beards. Ochlim vishotim, they eat, they drink. Smechim. Yodim shakadosh baruch hu oseh lahem nisim. They know that Hashem is going to do for them miracles. Okay, so again, this just highlights our question. So then what should we be doing? What should we be feeling on Rosh Hashanah? And as the sources, and we keep going in many other sources, we see this dichotomy continuing to develop. Says the Rambam in source number 8 when discussing the question of Hallel, why do we not say Hallel on Rosh Hashanah? Aval Rosh Hashanah v'Yom Kippurim ein bahem Hallel. Why don't we say Hallel on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur? Lefi shehein yemei tshuva v'yira v'facha. They are days of tshuva. They are days of returning to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, repentance, v'yira v'fachad, and fear, and another word also, and again, intense fear. V'lo yemei simcha yisera. They're not days of too much happiness. Okay, so the Rambam has started to kind of explain to us or highlight the fact that there's some kind of balance here that we're trying to figure out. They're days of happiness, but not too much happiness. And by the way, if you look along later on when the Rambam describes other Chagim, there actually is one Chag where he calls it a day of Simcha Yesera, and that is the day of Sukkot. So it's interesting to see the Rambam is being very deliberate in his description here. He's saying these are not days of too much happiness. They're days of seriousness. They're days of intensity. And therefore, we don't say Hallel on Rosh Hashanah. And yet, again, the Mishnah Berurah, why is it, source number 9, why is it that we wash our clothing and we take a haircut before Rosh Hashanah and we shave? Look at source number 9. Leharos she'anu bituchim bechasdo yitbarach. We're confident in Hashem's kindness. Sheyotzi litzedek mishpatenu. That he is going to give us a good judgment. So we're coming in with this balance between seriousness and yet between also confidence. Umikol makom, then says the Mishnah Berurah, lo yilbash berosh Hashanah bigdei rikma umeshi kish b'shar yom tov. But you shouldn't wear your finest clothing, what he describes as certain types of materials. You shouldn't wear your nicest clothing like you would other chagim. Why? Dihei moradin. You should have the seriousness of the judgment on your head. Ela yilbash bigadim livanim. You should wear white clothing. Now, by the way, it's actually interesting. The minhag actually is differently than the Mishnah Berurah describes here. Many of us wear our finest clothing. In fact, in Israel, you might have seen this a few times. This is something that I thought was very, very interesting. I noticed this the first time I was in yeshiva. Many Israelis who don't wear suits on Shabbos and don't wear suits generally actually wear suits on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. That's like their nicest time. So they bring out the best clothing that they have. So again, the minhag seems to be a little bit different, but we see here already that there is an element here of balance. And if you look at source number 11, the Mishnah Berurah highlights this as well. Why is it that we sit and we eat and we drink and we're happy? Ratzalomar, source number 11, says the Mishnah Berurah, Av shehu yom adin, even though it's a day of judgment, mikol makom mitzvah shel v'samachta b'chagecha shayach gambo. The mitzvah of v'samachta b'chagecha applies here as well, shegam hu bichlal chag, because this is also a day of celebration. Okay, so the first question I want to try to understand is, how do we navigate this? How do we navigate, on the one hand, having a day of intensity, of seriousness, and at the same time having a day that's meant to be a chag? Okay, and the truth is that this isn't just connected to the halachot of Rosh Hashanah. If we now go back to the first sources, if you go back to the beginning of your source sheet, I apologize for the back and forth, this dichotomy is actually built into the definition or the name of the day that the Torah gives to Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is not the name that is given in the Torah. And Yom Hadin is not the name that is given in the Torah. What does the Torah refer to as, how does the Torah refer to Rosh Hashanah? Yom TORAH. Look at source number 1. Ubachodesh hashivi'i, Parshas Pinchas, be'echad lachodesh, mikra kodesh yiyeh lachem, kol melechet avodah lo ta'asu, Yom TORAH yiyeh lachem. On the 7th month, in the first of the month, it is a day of holiness. You shouldn't do any work. It is a day of Yom TORAH. So that's very nice. Thank you. Yom TORAH. The problem is, what does Yom TORAH actually mean? What is a Yom TORAH? So many of us might think automatically the Yom TORAH reminds us of the shofar. Okay? And what is the shofar? Again, we'll get to the shofar a little bit later in the day. But the simple understanding of the shofar, or the way that the halacha develops shofar is a sound of crying. Okay? If you look at Targum Onkelos, the way Onkelos translates it, and source number 2 that I brought you, the highlight, I underlined the part for you. What is Yom TORAH? Yom Yivava. What is Yivava? The word Yivava actually originally is from in Shoftim, when it describes the mother of Sisra, her reaction as she awaits for Sisra to come home. And what does Yivava mean? It's a cry. Okay, what's a cry? What does a cry? Cry evokes a certain intensity, a sadness / not sure what's going on. So on the one hand, Yom TORAH is, as we know it, a Yom Hadin. It's a day of intensity. It's a day where we're just not sure how we're going to come out. On the other hand, in other sources, other places, the word TORAH doesn't actually mean Yivava, is interpreted differently. If you look at source number 3, in Parshat Balak, as part of the Nevuah of Bilam says in source number 3, Lo hibit aven b'Yaakov, v'lo avra'ah amal b'Yisrael, Hashem Elokav imo Utruat melech bo. It's describing how HaKadosh Baruch Hu relates to Am Yisrael. It says, Lo hibit aven b'Yaakov. He doesn't see any sin, any iniquity in Yaakov. V'lo ra'ah amal b'Yisrael. He doesn't see any bad amongst Am Yisrael. Hashem Elokav imo. Hashem is with him. Utruat melech bo. And the truah of the king is upon him. Now, what does truah here mean? Does it mean the cry of the king? That would be the standard interpretation. But if you look at some of the Mefarshim, they explain the word truah to be very different. Says the Ibn Ezra, what's truat melech bo? Says the Ibn Ezra in source number 4, truah refers to the sound of war, b'machaneh Yisrael, or the sound of gathering. The sound of, it's almost not just war, but celebration. It's when the king wants to gather his people, he makes the sound of the truah. So the truah is not necessarily a sound of intensity and a sound of sadness. It's actually a sound of celebration. It's a sound of the king gathering his people. And that's when we blow the truah, or when God commands us to blow the truah with the chatzotzrot, it's about bringing the people together. And look at Rashi. How does Rashi interpret utruat melech bo? This is a fascinating interpretation. Says Rashi, what does the word truah come from? Lashon chiba v'reut. The word truah, says Rashi, actually the root of the word is reut, friendship, love. But we know that we're familiar with the word reut. Reut means a friend. And truat melech bo here is a lashon of chiba, of love, of connection. Kemo ra'abi Yisrael, ohev David, vayitne lemereyehu. Mereyehu refers to a friend. So according to these Mefarshim, the implication of the word truah might not be just simply sadness, intensity. It actually seems to be referring to celebration, a certain amount of happiness. So already in the name Yom Truah, we see this dichotomy taking place. So question number 1 that I want us to try to understand is, how are we supposed to navigate this? How are we supposed to navigate Rosh Hashanah? And what should we be feeling on Rosh Hashanah? Should I be going in intense, sad, nervous? Should I be going in ready to celebrate? Should we be approaching Rosh Hashanah? Yes?
I just say a marvel to see our soldiers blow their shofar.
Excellent.
When they're in
Excellent, true. And that's 100% true. And the shofar is a symbol of so many different things. By the way, the shofar is a symbol of going into war, which could also be a sense of trepidation, but it's also a sign of victory, okay, and morale. So you're 100% right here, and therefore the shofar has so many different aspects to it. But I'm also pointing out that the Rosh Hashanah itself seems to have that as well. You're 100% correct. Yes.
So I just want to let you know that when I was a kid, I went to Gateshead after growing up in Crown Heights, and it was very confusing for me because in Chabad we celebrated as a chag, and then you went to Gateshead,
and it was very serious.
Everybody had all this awe, and I'm like, wow.
Exactly. So everybody will highlight it exactly. 100% true. Different groups will highlight it differently. And I think you go to one type of yeshiva and they're singing and dancing. I vaguely remember. I went to Shalavim. And I live in Shalavim now, and I went to the Yeshiva Shalavim. I remember Yeshiva Shalavim, the davening on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur is very, very celebratory. A lot of singing and a lot of dancing. And I remember there was always the side. He's not there anymore. He's now moved to a different area. But there was one of the assistant Rosh Yeshiva. His name was Rav Gantz. And Rav Gantz was an older Israeli. Actually, I think he was even a Holocaust survivor. And his approach was a little bit more serious. And I always remember that the dancing would be very, very lebedik and very exciting. And there would always be this point during Rosh Hashanah where Rav Gantz would turn around and be like, Ad Kan. Like that's it. Like, okay, you had your dancing, it's still Yom Adin, and that was the balance that we're all trying to find. Question number 2 that I want us to try to understand, and I think it's again building off of question number 1 is, if Rosh Hashanah is a Yom Hadin, then the tefillot of Rosh Hashanah, and this is again our focus for this shiur, the tefillot seem to be a little bit strange. There is mention of Yom Hadin. Okay, and perhaps the most famous mention of Yom Hadin and Rosh Hashanah would be in source number 14, Unetane Tokef, right? Unetane Tokef is the famous tefillah where we're highlighting and we're stressing the fact that this is the day of judgment and everyone's passing by. Mi yichyeh, mi yamus, mi b'kitzo, mi lo b'kitzo. So there's no question that there are moments where there is a highlight of din. But if you were to survey the tefillot of Rosh Hashanah, and you were to pick one theme that summarized the tefillot of Rosh Hashanah, it wouldn't be din. What would it be? Anyone? I encourage you to look this through. It would be malchus. It would be kingship. It would be kingship. And I brought just two examples. One example is the main bracha of Rosh Hashanah, the main bracha of Shmona Esrei in source number 12, which is usually the bracha of Shmona Esrei. The bracha of Shmona Esrei is where Chazal highlight the main theme of the day. That's the main bracha. It's where we're supposed to basically turn to Hashem and say, this is what I'm davening for. And what do we say? Elokeinu v'elokei avosenu, meloch al kol ha'olam kulo bichvodecha. You should, I underlined it for you, you should be the king of the world. V'hinase al kol ha'aretz bikarecha. And the entire world should recognize that you are in charge. Ve'hofa ba'adar ga'on uzecha, meaning, what is this tefillah all about? God, we're re-energizing and we're reconnecting to God being the king of the universe, being the king of the world. We say, V'yomar kol asher neshama be'apo. Everyone should know, every soul should know that you are the king. We end with Baruch Ata Hashem, Melech al kol haaretz, Mikadesh Yisrael, V'yom HaZikaron. Okay, so we call it V'yom HaZikaron, and we have Zichronot as part of it. But the focus, the majority of our tefillot and the songs that we sing, Hashem Melech, Hashem Malach, Hashem Yimloch Liolam Va'ed, there's also mention about din. But the focus is on kingship. And the question becomes, why? What is there a relationship between the day of judgment and the theme of kingship? Or is this just some kind of there's two different themes to the day and it's just a coincidence? Or is there something more happening? Why are we focusing so much on this and not focusing on din? And to take this even perhaps a step further, if this day was really all about din, I would think that the process of tshuva would be front and center. And what do I mean by the process of tshuva? Tshuva is a process. The process of repentance doesn't just mean that we feel bad. There's an actual process we're supposed to go through. What is the main part of the process that we do in tefillah as part of the process of tshuva? The vidoy, the confession. There's no confession on Rosh Hashanah. There's no vidoy on Rosh Hashanah. Why is there no vidoy on Rosh Hashanah? Why, if this is the Yom Hadin, I would think this is the day when we should be focusing. Now, of course, as we know, Yom Kippur is the day where we focus on the vidoy. And we have the vidoy during Slichos and Aseret Yimei Tshuva. We have the vidoy intertwined, but all of a sudden we take a break from the vidoy in Rosh Hashanah. And the question is, where is the vidoy? If this is Yom Hadin, we should be focusing, l'chora, or at least having an important part be about Yom Hadin and where is the vidoy?
The blending, we're also loving the concept and feeling connected to Hashem more about His kingship.
So that's excellent. That's what we're meaning. The question is where is the vidoy, and why is Rosh Hashanah seem to have a different theme? And that's what we're going to discuss. And the fourth question I'd like to raise, this is more, I think, relevant to this year. Okay, I myself personally, I'm just going to talk personally for a second. I can't say I'm dreading Rosh Hashanah. I'm finding it harder to prepare for Rosh Hashanah this year, and I imagine many of you feel the same way. And for each of us, it could be different reasons. Okay, I know myself, and this I don't have an answer to this, but I can tell you, I'm just talking for personally for 1 second. Last year, I davened in the Yeshivat Shalavim. I left there feeling like I had a great tefillah. Rosh Hashanah was beautiful. I davened there on Yom Kippur. And then what happened 10 days later, 15 days later? And I look at myself and I say, well, then what does that mean about my tefillah? And the truth is, I don't have an answer to that. I think that's a question that we're going to continue to struggle with, which is we don't have answers to some of the tragedies that are happening that shouldn't necessarily take away our tefillot. But that's just one thing that I'm struggling with. But another thing that I'm struggling with is...
Surely that's the whole point.
What do you mean? Please, share.
I feel anyway, the whole point is that our job is to daven.
Correct.
That's our job to daven. What Shalom does, you think it's not like you daven, you got it.
Correct.
You haven't written out.
Not everything is given to us as 100%.
The answer is legitimately.
True, and we don't understand it. I still find it to be a little bit hard for myself in the sense that I felt like I had a nice davening. So maybe it makes me question, maybe I need to approach my tefillah differently this year. Maybe the tefillah for me shouldn't all be just about the singing and the dancing. Maybe I don't know. I'm struggling with that, and I can't say that there's a clear answer. I think there are some things that we have to just say, Atzat Hashem Hitakum, and we don't really fully understand. But what I did want to highlight that I think is something that maybe we can talk about or try to relate to here is these big themes of the kingship of God, Zichronot, Shofar. There are so many big themes that are in the tefillot of Rosh Hashanah. And it's one thing when we're all personally going through struggles, and everyone always has own personal issues, but when the nation is going through such upheaval. Now, Baruch Hashem, we continue to daven that what's going on right now in the Mivtza, and everything is continuing.
Hashem just did Nisan.
Excellent.
I'm on the
I
side
agree.
Of the Chabad people that say Hashem is definitely going to give us a good judgment.
I agree with you. I don't disagree with you.
That we're going to win this thing quickly.
I don't disagree with you, and I continue, and I daven, and I agree with you. I agree with you 100%, and I answer a resounding amen to everything you're saying, 100%. And I don't mean to create problems where problems are there. I agree with you that in light of recent events, we should have a tremendous amount of hakaras hatov, a tremendous amount of hakaras hatov, a tremendous amount of hakaras, and I don't question that. And if anything, that is helping me go in. But I will tell you that before the recent events, I was dreading it because I looked around, and I think this is also something we can't ignore. There are still tens of thousands of Jews that are displaced from their homes. There are still chatufim. There are still so many families that are dealing with refuah. Okay, the amount of soldiers whose lives will never be the same because of their injuries and families. And to me, it makes it a little bit harder for me to focus on the bigger themes. Because I'm overwhelmed. Now, normally I'm overwhelmed with my own personal stuff, but I'm able to push that to the side on Rosh Hashanah and say, okay, but here I find that it's a little bit harder. And I'd like to just, for us, I think there is something that we can talk about today that can hopefully help us in that. Because that is something that I think I'm feeling, and I imagine many people are feeling, which is just, how am I supposed to push aside? Now, it doesn't mean you shouldn't daven for all those things. Of course we should daven for our personal challenges. And of course we should daven for all of OUisrael, and as we've spoken about, we should be asking for the bigger things. Last week and 2 weeks ago we talked about how we shouldn't just be asking for the small things. We should be dreaming big. And we should be asking for that. But sometimes it becomes harder to focus on those bigger things when there's so much around us that seems to be a little bit in upheaval. And so, again, just to summarize the questions that we have, and I'd like us to kind of hopefully come to some understanding. Question number 1 is, what kind of day is Rosh Hashanah supposed to be? Is it a day of happiness? Is it a day of intensity? Question number 2, what is going on? Why are we focusing on the kingship of God? And why is that the main theme of the day? Whereas we seem to be minimizing more the judgment aspect. We talk about it, it's mentioned, but it's not the focus of the day. I would think this should be the focus of the day. Number 3, or really I would say 2A, if you will. Where's the vidoy? Where's the act of tshuva that we usually are associating with Yom Hadin? We kind of push that off to Yom Kippur. Why in Rosh Hashanah are we not mentioning it? And number 4 is just how this year can we successfully focus on these bigger picture events with all that's going on. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to focus on question number 1 first, and that is what's going on in Rosh Hashanah. And I'd like to share with you a couple of different approaches to that. And hopefully through that we'll be able to answer our other questions as well. So the first answer that I'd like to share with you to how to approach Rosh Hashanah, is it a day of judge, is it a day of intensity, or is it a day of happiness? This is an answer by Rav Nevinsal. Rav Nevinsal in source number 15 shares something that I thought is very, very interesting. And he differentiates between the yachid and the tzibor, between the individual and between the community. And he says the following: V'tirtzu haposkim, in source number 15, sheyesh din lekol yachid v'yachid v'din nifrad leklal Yisrael. There is the judgment of every individual, and then there is the judgment of the Jewish nation as a whole. Al atzmo, for yourself, al kol yachid v'yachid, chayav adam liot mudag, shema chalila lo yetzei zakai bidino. When it comes to the individual, every single individual needs to have a certain amount of fear, trepidation, concern, that maybe he won't. This is Yom Hadin. The focus for every Yachid and Yachid, when we're thinking about us as individuals, the focus should be mostly, says Rav Nevinsal, on the judgment. And maybe we won't come out and have a good judgment. And when we talk about individuals, we're not just worried about ourselves as individuals, we're worried about our families as individuals, we're worried about our friends as individuals, we're worried about all of OUisrael as individuals. Every single individual should be wondering and concerned with how he's going to come out. Elagam al hamatzav ba'aretz. Even on the situation in Eretz. So by the way, Rav Nevinsal was writing this many, many years ago, because there was always a matzav ba'aretz, okay? V'al matzav hanra b'tvutzot. And on this unfortunate situation, even in Chutz La'aretz. Al kol prat uprat bifnei atzmo yeshna ivadaut. When it comes to every single individual, there is a sense of uncertainty. Ivadaot, we don't know what's going to be. V'anu mudagim umitpalalim. And our focus is on the din and on the tefillat. Aval, yesh no din al klal Yisrael. But there was another type of judgment, and that is the judgment for the nation as a whole. Excuse me. Uvema shenogea lemishpat shebein Yisrael l'shar umot ha'olam. And when it comes to the judgment between Am Yisrael and the other nations, bazeh anu bituchim sheyetze kaor dinenu v'shebechol shana yotzei Am Yisrael zakai. As a nation, we know that Am Yisrael is going to come out on top. Netzach Yisrael lo yishaker, right? The eternity of the Jewish nation is never going to lie, is never going to end. Or as some of the famous songs, we say, Am Yisrael lo mefachen miderech ha'aruka, right? We know that as a nation, we're going to survive, we're going to continue. As individuals, there's more of this fear, there's more of this unknown. And that's just going to tell us how we're supposed to balance this. Yes, please.
This doesn't answer the question why we don't have vidui.
Correct. This is answering question number one. I want to share with you a couple of approaches to answer number one. The third answer that we're going to come to with answer number one, I think is going to answer all of them together, but I wanted to just first share with you a couple of approaches to answer number one. Correct. This just answers number one, finding the balance between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Okay, answer number two. And again, this one also, you could argue, is focusing more on question number one, but it might relate. And this is, I want to share with you some words by Rabbi Doron Perez. Rabbi Doron Perez is head of World Mizrahi. Aside from the opportunity to teach with you here, I work at World Mizrahi, and Rabbi Doron Perez is the head of World Mizrahi, and many of you may be familiar with him. Unfortunately, he is the father of a soldier, Daniel Perez, who was killed on October 7th. His body is still kept in Gaza, still being held in Gaza for many years. For many months, it was thought that maybe he was still alive. Only months later, did we know that he was actually in fact killed on October 7th. He was on the Nachal Oz base, which is the closest base to Gaza, and him and his tank mates gone out on October 7th and killed hundreds of terrorists, saving many lives. And unfortunately, eventually his tank was overrun and he was killed. And what was particularly unique about the situation and is relevant to what we're about to learn about is that Rav Doron Perez had another son, Yonatan, who was at the time living in Yad Binyamin with his family, went down on October 7th because he got called down. He got shot in the leg, unfortunately. He was actually right near where his brother Daniel was. He helped retake over the Nachal Oz base after it had been run over. And 2 weeks after October 7th, he got married. And the family was faced with the decision, he was meant to get married, whether or not they should have the wedding while their son at the time their son Daniel was unknown. They didn't even know if he was taking Hajj, they didn't know if he was alive. And the question was, how do you find the way to have a wedding? Should you have this wedding while also dealing with this intense unknown in the fate of their son Daniel? So Rav Perez actually put out a small booklet, which you might have seen if you haven't seen it yet. If you haven't seen it yet, you should see it soon. It was put out together with the HaMizrahi magazine. The booklet is called Days of Awe in Times of War. A number of essays that he wrote, personal reflections connected to the Yamim Norim. If you haven't seen it yet, I encourage you. Any shul that receives the HaMizrahi magazine, which I believe many of your shuls probably do, will be getting copies of it. If you haven't seen it already, it should be there. It's a small little booklet. I didn't bring it in with me. Anyway, so I want to share with you a short piece from it, because what Rav Doron basically answers, to answer our first question, is that when it comes to different emotions, we usually sometimes and we've mentioned this a couple of times in our own classes so far, we generally tend to assume that our emotions are linear. Either I feel happy or I feel sad. Either I feel ready to go, it's a chag, it's a happy chag, or it's a day of intensity. And the answer is, humans are able to hold more than one emotion at once, contradictory emotions at once. And therefore, Rosh Hashanah is a day that is complex. It's a day that is both intense and difficult and challenging and maybe even sad on some level, and it's a day of happiness. Because we sometimes oscillate between one and the other, and sometimes we even hold those emotions together at the same time. And I want to just read to you an excerpt where Rav Doron highlights this in his own personal experience. The answer, it seems, again, he's talking about Rosh Hashanah, and then he's going to talk about his own personal experience. The answer, it seems, is that it is both at the very same time. This is him answering the very question that we asked, which is, what is Rosh Hashanah? We feel so close to God at times, like a friend, and feel the privilege of living in his world. We celebrate and we coronate him. Yet at the same time, we feel so distant, fractured and broken. So many things in life are not the way that they should be. We're in source number 16, in case I didn't say that. In our distance, we yearn for closeness. The shofar is the most visceral, natural, deepest cry for closeness, celebrating the privilege of feeling close and at the same time yearning from a broken heart when we feel so distant. On Rosh Hashanah, we are somehow whole and broken at the same time, complete yet fractured. The mainstay of Rosh Hashanah is to pray for a vision of an ideal world, a utopian world where we all follow the word of God and a life of spiritual and moral clarity. We so deeply crave to live this ideal, but in the reality of life, we are often very distant from achieving it. Hopes, dreams, and aspirations often come crashing down in the harsh reality of life. The distance between the real and the ideal is where life is lived. We celebrate when our reality is close to the ideal we envision. We are broken and yearning when we feel so distant. And so Rosh Hashanah is a day where we feel both of these emotions at once. And listen how he continues. The greatest lesson for me from the marriage of Yonatan was his older son, while our dearest Daniel was missing, is how expansive the human heart is. It is indeed somehow possible to totally hold conflicting emotions at the same time. That our happiest occasion was tinged with our saddest moments. That appreciation for Yonatan and deep angst and anxiety for Daniel can be contained together. That blessing and curse, the exhilaration of that which is present and the pain and yearning for that which is absent can somehow live together. And so Rosh Hashanah is a day of complexity. It's a day where we have different emotions and where we're commanded, I would suggest, and almost showed how we can hold and maintain different emotions. You know, I've had the privilege in various different ways to talk to lots of groups that have come from missions, that have come from America since October 7th in various different roles as part of my job at Mizrahi. And I always used to say to them that I feel like if I had to pick how OUisrael has been feeling, and it's obviously shifted and gone, I would say that OUisrael has been holding two different emotions that seem to be conflicting at the same time. The emotion number one is we're a nation in pain. We're a nation that's hurting, and that's continued since October 7th and continues all the way through. And yet at the same time, we're a nation that is strong. We're an Am Shel Giborei Al, as the well-known song. We are a nation of superheroes. So we're a nation that's strong, and we're a nation in pain. How could that be? The answer is that's just who we are. And we're able to hold both of those emotions at the same time. And that's what I think many of us have been trying to do throughout this entire war, which is, on the one hand, we're sad, we're broken. Every face that we see, every family we learn about that's torn apart, everything we hear about, it's pain. The pain is, and then at the same time, there's a certain amount of pride and gvura that we've been experiencing and that we've been tapping into and that we've been understanding. That I think again, it shows us that we're able to hold those two emotions. Yes, please.
Yeah, another adjective you could use is that the emotions are not exclusive of each other.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Correct. Meaning in this case specifically. Yeah. Correct. We're going to get to something similar in a second. Yes.
We're really preparing for this because every time we have a wedding, we break the glass.
Absolutely.
And people don't really practice these conflicting emotions, but now...
Absolutely. Well, we do on some level, not necessarily national level, but yes. Just to highlight what you're saying, not only halachically are we commanded al rosh simchati imlo ala et Yerushalayim al rosh simchati, but think about what families always do. What do families always do when they have a simcha? What invariably the matriarch or the patriarch or someone gets up and talks about those who are not here. Those who helped us become who we are. There's always going to be this element of, we remember where we came from, at those highest moments, we're mentioning the sadness as well, because that's how we deal with human emotion. Yes, please.
It seems that for the individual, it's much more difficult to balance two conflicting emotions, especially when something is recent in history, as opposed to a nation.
Okay, excellent. So you're connecting the two almost in a certain way. You're suggesting, and it's similar to what we're about to suggest. But I think if I understand what you're saying is that for an individual, it's a little bit easier. It's a little harder to do that. Harder to do that because it becomes real. Whereas, well, I would say it a little bit differently. And this is the third answer that I'd like to suggest. The question we're started with, and this is question number one, is how do we? What kind of day is Rosh Hashanah? It's a day of happiness. Yet it's also a day of deed. And this connects to the second question, which is it's a day of malchus, and it's also a day of din. How do we balance the two? And the answer is, wait a second, what's the happiness coming from? And the truth is, meaning when we say Rosh Hashanah is a day of happiness, so we saw the source said because we're confident that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to give us a good judgment. Where's that confidence coming from? The answer is, in order to understand what it means when we say we're balancing simcha and we're balancing din, the source of that simcha is the theme of the day. What's the source of the happiness on Rosh Hashanah? Why are we confident that we're going to come out with a good din? Because we spend our entire day focusing on what? Kingship. And I'll explain what I mean. The purpose of the kingship is not simply another theme that we talk about on Rosh Hashanah because it happens to fall out and it works nicely with Yom HaDin. Why are we confident that we're going to come out with a good din? Because we are turning around and we're re-engaging, we're recommitting ourselves to God. And when we recommit ourselves to God, we're turning to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and we're saying, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I want to be a part of this bigger picture. We're taking a step back, we're zooming out, and we're saying, this whole thing that we're experiencing, this whole life of ours, and this whole life of us as individuals and as a nation, is much bigger than ourselves. This is all part of a long story, a long history. And so every single year we turn to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and we say on Rosh Hashanah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we want to be a part of that story. You're the king. I'm re-accepting you as my king. And by definition, what I'm saying is, God, I'm worthy of being a part of your kingdom. I want to be a part of what you're trying to create. And therefore, it's worth it for you to keep me around. It's worth it for you to give me a din. The malchus, the kingship that we discussed, when we re-engage, when we recommit ourselves to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when we recommit ourselves to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the mission that He has for us, that is going to help us in our judgment. And I want to bring you a couple of sources that highlight this, that I think are very, very, very interesting. Look at source number 17 and 18. I'll take questions afterwards. B'simcha. I want to just highlight the point. Says, this is in the introduction to the Art Scroll Machzor, source number 17. What do we mean by king? Does God require pomp and obeisance? Surely His wish for recognition is not a sign of vanity. No, not at all. Ideally, a king is the organizing power of a country. He is the manifestation of the national will of destiny. He uses his absolute power to guide the people's energies and resources toward achievement of the greatest benefit of all. Admittedly, there have been very few such kings in all of recorded history, but we are speaking of ideals. And I just, as I read this, I think about, again, and I'm not getting political in any way, shape, or form, but if you compare the Jewish leaders in general compared to the leaders of our enemies and how they treat their people, and at least whether you agree or disagree with what's happening with the current leadership, overall our leadership is for the people, whereas our enemies, what do? They don't take care of their people. In fact, they make their people vulnerable. They take advantage of their people. That's the opposite of what a leader is meant to be. A king is meant to be there for the people. If the world could have such kings and their populations would unite behind them, society would thrive and countless dormant dreams would be revived and fulfilled. In this sense, God wants us to accept Him as king. By doing so, we would benefit Him only because we would be elevating ourselves. By becoming His subjects, we would join in the mission for which He created the universe. In other words, on Rosh Hashanah, when we proclaim God as king, we declare ourselves ready to make creation worthwhile. This is what we are called upon when we proclaim God's sovereignty on Rosh Hashanah. Each Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish people as individuals and as a group, can mesh the cogs of creation into a unified machine in the service of the king. The fullest expression of kingship is the complete obedience of all subjects to the will of the monarch. A king's greatest measure of majesty comes when his subjects freely, intelligently, and enthusiastically choose to serve him. God's kingship, too, should flow from mankind's free will decision that it best fulfills its own destiny by submitting to God's will. To achieve this end, God put man at the center of the universe and tied the fortunes of every creature to His choice. And so one of the pieces here, there's a lot here to unpack, but one of the things he's stressing here that I think is the key point. When we declare God as king, and when we turn to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and say, we want to be a part, we want you to be our king, we're saying, God, I want to be a part of this whole thing that you're creating and you're developing, and therefore, keep me around. Therefore, give me the tools, give me what I need, help me be a part of your nation. Help me be a part of who you are, help me be a part of what you're trying to create. And by doing that, it is a method through which we're hopefully able to be zocheh badin. The malchus, the focus on the kingship, helps us ultimately in the din. And I want to just share with you, Rabbi Eliezer Melamed highlights this again in a beautiful way as well. Source number 18. We'll read the Hebrew. I'll translate it for you. Yicholim hayinu merov da'aga al ta'atir chayenu b'shana haba'ah. Had we focused only on judgment, then most of our fears and our thoughts and our concerns would only be on our own personal needs. L'akdish kol yom hadin l'tfilot pratiot al parnasa ubriyut v'chol sha'ar hadvarim sh'adam tarud b'hasagatam kol hashana. Originally, had Yom Hadin, had Rosh Hashanah been just a Yom Hadin, every person would escape into their little corner, figuratively, and focus on his own personal needs, on what he needs, which are important and should also be developed and discussed on Rosh Hashanah. But that's all we would do. Ulam zuhi sigulatam hamiyuchedet shel Yisrael. But this is the uniqueness of Yisrael. Sheritzonam ha'amok bioter. What we really want on a deeper level, shetitgalem malchuto yitbarach, that God's kingship should be revealed. V'ha'olam kulo yitukan v'yigael, and the world should be fixed and should be redeemed. V'afilu im l'shem kach yitztarchu lisbol yisurim, even if sometimes it means we're going to get, we're going to have to suffer on some level. B'derech gidola v'nora'a zu bachar am Yisrael. This is the great path that Am Yisrael have chosen. Hachel me'avot ha'olam, from our forefathers, shekiblu al atzmam lahamin b'Hashem el mul kol ovdei ha'elilim ha'misvivam, from our forefathers Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, who chose to believe in Hashem, even if that meant putting them on one side versus the rest of the world. Shelimrot kol hasevel sheba, despite all the pain that they had to endure, Bachar Am Yisrael shelo lehitbolel ba'amim. Am Yisrael chose not to assimilate amongst the nations. Ulamshich, laseit et degel ha'emunah v'haTorah, k'dei letaken olam b'malchut shakai. That we continue to raise the flag of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in order to fix the world. And listen to this. Yisrael minichim et sa'aram ve'oskim b'chvodo v'giloi malchuto. When we as a nation, on Rosh Hashanah, we push aside our personal needs, we mention them, but we don't focus just on that. We push them to the side, and we focus more on accepting God's kingship. Omer HaKadosh Baruch Hu l'malachim, God turns to the angels and says, Re'u b'nai chavivai, look at my sons. Sheminichim tza'aram ve'oskim b'chvodi. They put aside their own personal needs and are focused on my honor. Uvikach mistatmot ta'anotav shel Satan shrotzeh levatel et Yisrael me'olam. And through that, the Satan, who's trying to prevent us from having a successful Rosh Hashanah, is pushed aside. His ta'anot against us are pushed away. V'Yisrael zochin l'shana chadasha sheba yitkanmu od sa'ad likrat hatikun ha'geula. And then that is what causes and enables Am Yisrael to merit a new year where they'll be able to push things forward one more step towards the greater redemption. Ukechol sheniskeh lechabel aleinu b'Rosh Hashanah malchuto, the more that we're able to accept upon ourselves God's kingship on Rosh Hashanah, be'anava v'yirah, with humility and with fear, begil uverada, with celebration and with trepidation, kach niskeh yoter l'shana tova u'mivarecha. Then we as individuals will merit it, because we're turning to Hashem and we're saying, "Kadosh Baruch Hu, I want to be a part of this." Kadosh Baruch Hu says, "If you want to be a part of this, then I want you to be a part of it as well." And I think this approach, recognizing the power of accepting God as our King, is something that I think can answer some of our other questions as well. We talked about obviously the answer to the question why the focus is on Malchut. We asked why is there no Vidoy on Rosh Hashanah? Because the focus of Rosh Hashanah is meant to be different. There's going to be time for Vidoy. We have Aseret Yimei Tshuva and we have Yom Kippur to do Tshuva. Rosh Hashanah is one day where we take a step back. We look at the bigger picture, and we recommit ourselves to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and to His mission, which also is our mission. And then we can turn it back and say, okay, now I want to focus on those aspects of what I'm missing. Rosh Hashanah is that day where we basically turn to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and say, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we're worthy of staying around. We're worthy of a great din because we believe in you and we believe in what this is all about. And that's the focus of Rosh Hashanah, is taking that bigger picture, that the macro picture, stepping back and looking and thinking big picture, what is this all about? And hopefully that is meant to give us the inspiration to then focus on the rest of the week, on the Vidoy, and on reconnecting with HaKadosh Baruch Hu and fixing the small things. And I would like to suggest that this is also a way that we can help ourselves this year as we approach Rosh Hashanah, thinking about everything that's going on with Am Yisrael and all the pain, and how can we focus on some of these bigger picture issues when there's so much going on. One of the things that has always inspired me, that has stood out for me, when I hear family members of those who have been killed or those who are suffering, and I hear them talk about what keeps them going and how they process this. One of the themes that I've always heard that has resonated with me was the families talk about it and they say, this is just bigger than us. The war, the situation. Yisrael, Medinat Yisrael is not just about me and my son, or me and my daughter, and me and my father, whatever it is. I recognize what gives me the chizuk to be able to deal with my personal tragedy. I'm talking about an individual quoting somebody. What gives them the ability to deal with their personal tragedy is when they take a step back and they say, this is part of a bigger picture. This is part of a process. This is part of something much greater than ourselves as individuals and even this generation. And when you take that step back, it hopefully gives you a perspective that enables you to deal with the personal tragedy and the pain that we continue to see. And so I would suggest that that's what we're trying to do on Rosh Hashanah. How do we deal with all these different things that are going on, personal, communal, national? And the answer is, we're not ignoring them. And we can have some time on Rosh Hashanah to focus on them. But the main point of Rosh Hashanah is to enable us to take a step back and try to see the bigger picture. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is our King, re-accepting and reaffirming HaKadosh Baruch Hu is our King, and recognizing that there is something greater than ourselves that is at play here. And the hope is that through that, it gives us the power to continue to go on and to deal with all of the different things that we're dealing with as individuals, as a nation, and as a people. And so I hope that that perspective is able to give us a little bit something to think about and as we approach Rosh Hashanah. I wanted to share with you one other quick idea. We have a few more minutes, and as you know, I can't end too early. No, I'm just kidding. We'll give you some time today. But I wanted to share one other idea that resonates with me. It's connected to tefillah that I think has always resonated with me on Rosh Hashanah that I hope will help you as well. And that is what I call in section number 2, the tefillah of the shofar. There are many different reasons given for why we blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. Perhaps the most famous, again, there are a number of ones, perhaps the most famous is the one in source number 19, is the Rambam, where the Rambam says, what's the purpose of the shofar? The purpose of the shofar is it's an alarm clock. Uru yishenem mishinaschem. Right, I underlined the part, Rebbe's Yeshbo, there is a hint to the shofar. Kilomar uru yishenem mishinaschem. Those of you who are sleeping, we're sleeping. Not physically, we're sleeping proverbially. Wake up from your slumber. V'nir damim hakitzu mitar damatchem. Wake up from your slumber. V'chipsu masechem v'chizru b'tshuva. So what is the shofar? The shofar is an alarm clock that's basically saying, hey guys, wake up. You've been just walking, sleepwalking for an entire year. It's time to get ready. It's time to understand that the judgment is coming. That's one answer for the shofar. The other idea of the shofar that we mentioned today is it's the sounding of the king. It's the coronation of the king. It represents the two themes we've been talking about, din and of course malchus. It also represents a certain level of victory. There are so many different. In fact, I think Rav Sajigo gives like 13 different reasons for why we blow for the significance of the shofar. But there's one aspect of the shofar that I wanted to mention to you that I heard in the name of I read really in the writings of Rav Soloveitchik that very much resonated with me. Rav Soloveitchik points out that there are many parts of the shofar, many themes within the shofar that are very much connected to tefillah. In fact, when do we blow the shofar? So we blow the shofar before Musaf, but we also blow the shofar during Musaf. During Chazarat HaShatz, by the way, there are some communities that blow the shofar not just during Chazarat HaShatz, they blow the shofar during the silent Shemona Esrei, which is hard to arrange, how everyone should get up to the right place, but many communities blow during. So we're blowing the shofar during our tefillah. Says Rav Soloveitchik, what that really hints to is the fact that the shofar, on some level, is a form of tefillah. And in fact, we see this also, we're not going to see this inside, but the Gemara in source number 20 discusses what the shape of the shofar should be. Should the shofar be bent? Or should the shofar be straight? And the way Rashi explains both interpretations is it's connected to different approaches to tefillah. Should a person be bent down when in the position of tefillah, or should a person approach tefillah with a certain amount of seriousness? And seriousness means not confidence, but also seriousness, standing straight. Which means that the shofar is meant to represent an act of tefillah. Says Rav Soloveitchik, how does the shofar represent tefillah? He makes the following beautiful suggestion. We're going to read it inside. We're going to skip the first paragraph. Source number 21. Read the last two paragraphs inside. Lo adam bilvad mitpalel. Man is not the only being that davens. Ela kol ba'alei chayim shofechet libo lifnei aborei ba'ofen instinctivi uvilti muda. If there's ever a word in Rav Soloveitchik's writings that you can't figure out what it is, chances are it's an English word that he's writing in Hebrew, like instinctivi. Okay, it is an instinctive, natural emotion or action that all animals do. Nevichat kelev, when a dog groans. Richashei hatzipurim, when the tzipurim chirp. Yilalat hatanim, when an alligator just yells or makes a noise. Kol hakolot hashonim hamagim min ha'arava ba'aravim. All those noises we hear in the wilderness. Kol ela mitmazgim litfila achat shel adecha kol basar yavo. They are all an expression of the animals calling out and davening to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Kasher kam Yehudi balayla l'slichot. When a Jew, this is a beautiful imagery. When a Jew gets up in the middle of the night to slichot, mitpalel yachad imo kol haolam kulo. He continues, he's joining in this chorus of animals that are davening and praying to HaKadosh Baruch Hu at night. Tzarich adam sheyitpalel lo rak b'torah ishiyot ruchanit hamishtameshet bekoach hadibor. Every human being is not just meant to daven using the koach of speech, ela af b'torat basar vadam. Not just as a human using his instinct and using his intellect as speech, but also as an animal, also as a being. Hatfilat tzricha lahabia lo rak et gadlut hadam ela af et shifluto. Tefillah is not just an expression of the uniqueness of man and our intellect, but it also is an expression of what we share with the rest of the beings in the world. Adam hu bachir hayitzurim. Adam is the highest level of creation. Elagam beryash fela va'afela haomedet de'ak tzara lifnei chai ha'olamim. Although we are the highest form of creation, on the other hand, we're also compared to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, like all the other animals in the world. Af bitzur v'chimahu kol shofar im lo za'akat ha'adam lelo diburim lelo milim. What is the shofar, says Soloveitchik? It's that person. It's the sound of the human being not having words to express what he wants to say. Zui za'akato hamitparetzet spontanit shel balei chayim shoroi b'yisurim. It's like every human being who's in pain and just shouts out, "Oi!" The krechts, as we would say, or the cry. That is the shofar. V'tfilat za'aka zulo hamilim v'adiburim ba'ikar. When it comes to tfilat za'aka, it's not the words and the speech. Ela kolot hanegicha shel hashofar habaim umitpartzim be'echrech acharei hatfilot shebrimrei finu. Rather, it's the cry. It's that shout that comes after we finish. And Rav Soloveitchik goes on to explain how a person davens on Rosh Hashanah and he says everything he wants to say, and then he realizes he didn't even get to half of what he wanted to say. So much more is inside, and he wasn't able to express it because we have emotions that we simply aren't able to express in words. And we get to this point where we're like, how are we going to properly relay our emotions to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Says Rav Soloveitchik, that's where the shofar comes in. The shofar is that sound of our sound where we've reached the end of our words. We've reached the end of being able to express, but there's so much more in our tefillot and in who we are that we want to say to Hashem, and we just don't have the words to say them. And the shofar is that sound that expresses that part of who we are. And so, as we sit there, Be'ezrat Hashem, or stand there on Rosh Hashanah, connecting to the shofar, this is just another idea, another way to look at the shofar. The shofar, this is, again, as I mentioned, I've connected to this the most. The shofar is that sound, that expression of what we all want to say, and we just don't know how to say it. Everything that we want to say, and we just don't have the words. That's what the call of the shofar is meant to do, is that expression of turning to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and saying, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we want a relationship, we want this. All those things that we want to say that we can't express, that is the sound of the shofar. So Be'ezrat Hashem, I hope some of these themes will help enhance our Rosh Hashanah this year. Wishing everybody aktiva v'chatima tova, shana tova. And as they say, tichle shana v'kilotea, tachel shana b'rchotea. That the year and its curses should end, and the new year and the brachot should begin. Be'ezrat Hashem.